Welcome to the Climate Energy Control Program at Washburn Tech. My name is Josh Thompson. Today I'm going to show you how to gauge up to a system. We're going to take you through the ins and outs of the gauges, the hoses, and the equipment. Let's go ahead and get started. Now, one of the first things we want to be aware of before we gauge up to a system is what kind of refrigerant is actually in the system. Now, the nameplate of the equipment is going to tell us that. This particular system happens to be 410A, and I have a 410A gauge set so that my pressures are actually measured properly. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that all my valves are closed and ready to go. Take my low side hose off, which is traditionally a blue color, and my high side hose off, which is traditionally a red color. Now these hoses, they're rubber gasketed and jacketed, and they've got little tiny pinpricks to make sure any off-gassing that occurs between the jackets and the hose itself don't bubble up and actually cause poor quality hoses. So if you are gauging up and you begin to see little frosty pinpricks, it means your hoses are failed. You need to get a new set of hoses. Second thing is that as we begin gauging up, you're going to notice that this knarled fitting here, knarling is the grip, it's got a little brass piece in the middle. That's called a depressor, and it's surrounded by a black gasket. That black gasket is our O-ring, and it's what keeps the refrigerant from blowing out. And the depressor in there is designed to push on our core valve. So that little pin right there has to match up perfectly with that center of that depressor. These caps right here are hex head caps, and it takes a crescent wrench to loosen them up, small little 6-inch crescent wrench, and tighten them. These here do not require a gasket on the inside to seal them, because they will match up perfectly with the flare face of this particular fitting. Other caps that are knarled have a gasket on the inside and do require you to make sure that they're finger tight. These ones here only require a wrench to tighten them up. And I always put them on the back side of my gauges so that I don't lose them, because I could be working on a gravel surface or in the mud or on grading, and if stuff falls through the grading, it's lost forever. Alright, next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead, and because I don't want that depressor to push on that core valve too soon, I'm going to pull my fitting up, and I'm going to engage the threads on it first. And it should go nice and easy. Make sure all my hoses are closed here. Once I get it set on there, I'm going to go fast to try and minimize any refrigerant loss. And now I've got refrigerant in this section of the hose. I need to make sure that any air that's in here does not potentially go back in the system, so we have to purge our hoses. I've got zero pressure here. I'm going to loosen up, allow a point for refrigerant to purge out. Just going to crack that valve. Once it begins hissing, I know that we're blowing it out. No air in the system, only refrigerant. Open that valve all the way. I want to make sure these valves are closed, because if this is open, refrigerant will push into this whole section without us having purged it yet. So, next thing I'm going to do is the high side, and the low side is the bigger pipe that's insulated. The high side is a smaller pipe that's uninsulated. So once again, I'm going to pull that fitting out. I'm going to start it threading on, and then I'm going to go fast to minimize any refrigerant loss. Got to purge that line on my high side. So I'm going to crack that valve. And open it all the way. And now I'm ready to, actually I can take readings, but before I do, I want to make sure I purge all my hoses. So I've got this yellow hose, which is a charging hose. And it's like a utility hose. It takes refrigerant out, puts refrigerant back in for us. I'm going to purge using my low side through my yellow hose all the way out the back. Now these ports back here are dummy ports. They don't go through into the manifold. They're just places for me to mount my hoses. These ports here actually have holes going through them to register into this chamber. There's a hollow chamber up in here. So I'm going to loosen this up on the backside. I'm going to crack my low side valve to apply pressure into this hose. And now, just going to purge gently and make sure that any air, if at all, that was in this hose is gone. And once I've closed it back up, now my system can operate, it can run, we can take measurements if we need to. One of the things about these gauges here is that as refrigerant comes up into them, there's a tube in the back that actually moves, and we're able to read pressure on the outside and a saturation temperature on the inside. And like I said, the traditional color code is red for high side and blue for low side pressures. So pressures and the corresponding saturation temperatures, and saturation just means the temperature refrigerant is changing state inside the coils. So here we've gauged up, we can read our pressures and temperatures, and now I'm ready to unhook. I've done my job. Traditionally, I like to have the system operating, but we're just going to demonstrate right now the process without actually having the system going. I'm going to go ahead and start by valving off my high side, so I trap all that pressure in here. This is still access to the system, but all this high side pressure is pushing in on this part of the chamber. I'm going to go ahead and open these valves here and here and allow this high side pressure to push into my low side, because high pressure always goes to low pressure. That way I'm putting as much refrigerant back into the system as possible. It's a minimum amount, could be liquid, probably is liquid because it's coming right out of the condenser. Minimum amount of liquid going right back into the suction line, which typically goes right back into the compressor, but it's such a small amount, shouldn't matter. And this is also the reason we purge our yellow hose, because any refrigerant that comes through here can siphon out anything that's in this yellow hose as it goes into the system. Once my pressures balance out and I give this, a few seconds to make sure that all the refrigerant in this line that's liquid has vaporized and been pulled back into the system, I'm going to go ahead and close my gauges, my manifold gauges here. And my high side ball valve stays closed. My low side ball valve I'm going to close, trapping any refrigerant from coming back in or going out. And I'm just going to unhook. Go really quick, if you can. Yeah. Okay. Any excess refrigerant, I'm going to go ahead and just purge out. It's referred to as de minimis. We can do this by law. Before I walk away, I put these on my dummy terminals here, so I can't connect these hoses without first taking these off and putting this back on, so I don't lose the charge out of my system. Snug those guys up. And these are 5-foot hoses. Typically, hoses come in 3-foot or 5-foot lengths. And I attach those to the back. Make sure my space is all cleaned up. And you're ready to go to the next job. And that was just a quick demonstration on how to gauge up safely, making sure that we're checking our hoses. We had an opportunity to make sure that all our valves were closed and open in the right timings, and we also made sure that we wore gloves, something to protect our eyes and our knees. So, good luck.